It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Tuesday, the 8th of October it is today, and welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Expresso on SABC3. Now, World Mental Health Day is observed every year on the 10th of October, and this day aims to raise awareness on the different mental health issues people face worldwide, and any kind of abuse, and whether it is physical, verbal or sexual, can have long-term effects on your mental health, just like other traumatic events. And so with so many South African women and children being sexually abused, kidnapped, assaulted, they are put at a much higher risk of developing a mental condition such as depression. So joining us this morning to discuss how trauma affects your mental health, we have specialist psychiatrist Dr. John-Randel Vermaak. Good to have you here with us this morning.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Dr. Vermaak, thanks for joining us. So, firstly, how would you define a traumatic event? What are the most common traumatic events facing South Africans currently?
Sure, so such a good question. The way I think about trauma is what that word really means, and the word comes from the Greek word for a wound. So trauma to me is anything that can hurt a person. Mm-hmm. And like we've said, that can be physical, like a rugby injury, but also, and so importantly, traumatic, verbal, emotional, sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. Those are all forms of abuse and all forms of trauma, because all of those things can hurt a person.
Yeah.
What's happening in our society is that there's an awareness around the trauma that women and children face in this country. And for us as guys, that's so important to recognize with this month of mental health awareness, and to ask ourselves, you know, how are we part of this debate, and what's the message that we take out there, you know?
And as you've just said, it comes from the Greek word meaning trauma, but a lot of it is unseen.
Oh, yes.
What happens to a person, especially on a psychological level, when something has happened to you. So let's talk about what happens to the human body when you go through a traumatic event, and what that impact is on you as a person.
Sure. So there's a beautiful book written called The Body Keeps the Score that really speaks of all the evidence that we've gathered in the last 50 years as to how trauma doesn't just sit in the mind, but actually profoundly changes a person, changes the brain, changes pathways in the brain, changes the way that we respond and interact with people, and also ups our sort of stress response. So people that face trauma have hormonal changes, the nervous system changes, so it really is a whole body experience, and something about that comes through when people talk of their traumatic experiences and they relive the whole thing, not just mentally, but in the body.
What happens, or what do you do after you've had a traumatic experience? Let's say, for example, that you've been kidnapped or that you were held hostage. What do you do?
I think one has to be careful to have a one-word answer for everyone, but listening to people and looking at where their stories changed, it usually starts with reaching out to someone. And that might be a friend or a loved one or a trusted person in the community, but it might also be the case that with certain traumas, they're so difficult that it's easier for a person to reach to a professional. So I would say there's no one right answer, but there seems to be something about making that step and reaching out to someone else and sharing that burden that sets off the course to recovery.
Absolutely. So we'll have Dr. Vermaak still in the studio to continue this conversation with us. And of course, if you are looking for a helping hand and someone to reach out to and to talk to, you can call the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, or SADAG. Their line 011 234 4837. And there are many institutions out there that are set in place to help victims of trauma in whatever form it might have taken place. And of course, on this Tuesday morning, we are focusing on mental health, as Dr. Vermaak said, that this month is aimed at creating more awareness around mental health issues that face so many people all across the world.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. This is your Feel Good Breakfast Show, Expresso on SABC3. And as you can clearly see with the preceding message before this segment, enough is enough. We're focusing on the mental health issues associated with trauma. We have Dr. John-Randel Vermaak joining us, who is here to educate us on exactly what happens to a person once they've experienced a traumatic event. And earlier on, he did shine light on the fact that it changes you on a fundamental level. Nervous systems are changed, neural pathways are reconnected and reshaped. Let's talk about what other problems can possibly develop from people experiencing trauma.
Thanks, guys. So the range of problems that people can develop can be really quite broad, because we've said that trauma can affect you so profoundly. So it can be very practical things like being more alienated from your family members, having difficulties at work, having difficulties with your responsibilities as a person in the world. If you're an adolescent or child, can often impact on your school performance. And all of these things start to put you at risk of significant mental health consequences. So people who suffer trauma are much more likely to develop problems with anxiety, depression, specific trauma syndromes like PTSD, and also sometimes develop coping strategies that aren't useful long term, like looking towards alcohol use or substance abuse to dull the impact of the trauma. So really a profound effect that trauma can have on a person.
What exactly is post-traumatic stress disorder, and can it lead to, is it a common thing to experience after you've had a traumatic experience?
So with trauma, there's certain traumas that really put you at risk of having PTSD as a full-blown syndrome that I'll talk to now. And those tend to be the more horrible, horrific traumatic experiences, like a rape or being held at gunpoint. Those kind of things impact us so profoundly that it has to impact on us.
Yeah.
And PTSD is a specific syndrome that has clusters of symptoms. So some of those symptom clusters are the memories, so things like flashback memories or nightmares that people complain of. Then there's the emotional aspect, so feeling more depressed, being anxious, having more negative thoughts, oftentimes blaming yourself, even though it's not rational. People can blame themselves or feel guilty or hopeless. Then there's the avoidance, so you don't talk to people that remind you of that trauma, or you avoid specific places or things that are associated with that traumatic event. And then lastly is the hypervigilance, so being on edge, you know, ducking under the time. Yes, because you're so primed and ready, and in that mode of fight or flight all the time. And so it's a combination of those. So no one PTSD has to look exactly like another, but when we start to hear those kind of symptoms, we're in the realm of PTSD.
Let's quickly talk about how abuse or trauma is treated, and then we'll reflect quickly on the helplines that people could get in contact with. But how is it treated?
Sure. So I think there has to be an holistic approach to treating it, which starts by providing a supportive environment and clear access to care. So people need to know where can they go and who can they talk to, and those professionals need to be able to provide the service. And then that service is generally based on supportive talk therapies. There's some exciting new PTSD-focused therapies that actually works with the body and with talking, so reprogramming that memory so that it loses that impact and that stronghold that it has in the mind. And then, of course, there's also sometimes, especially when there's comorbid anxiety or depression, where there's a space for psychopharmacological agents. So it's a whole person treatment approach that really serves to be the best.
And each one will be unique to each person's experience and what they've gone through.
Absolutely.
Dr. Vermaak, thank you very much for joining us this morning and enlightening us on this very, very important topic. And as we said early on, so if you're looking to reach out to the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, or SADAG's mental health helpline, that would be 011 234 4837. They also do have the suicide crisis line that you can call on 0800 567 567, and ensure that you are well informed, especially if you know somebody who might be going through something quite traumatic or PTSD related. Do educate yourself, make a call, rather ask the questions before it is too late.